Welcome to this Roll for Crit review. Today, we're diving into the world of Dungeons and Dragons, not to play the RPG, but to play this board game where you're going to be playing as Drow vying for power in Tyrants of the Underdark. The one we're taking a look at is actually a new addition from Gale Force 9. It includes not only the older edition, but the expansion that was designed for that in one box.
This is a hybrid deck building and area control game. Each player is going to start with a basic deck. Everyone's going to have the same cards. And as you go, you'll be adding more cards to it, getting more powerful, etc. There are two primary forms of currency you're going to be receiving from the cards you play. Those are power and influence. Power is going to be used to manipulate different elements of this board that we will get to next. Influence is primarily going to be for buying new cards over here. Actually, you're recruiting minions for your nefarious plans and adding them to your deck. Each card has in the top corner the cost, the amount of influence you need to spend in order to recruit it, and then some kind of an ability. They also have different thematic representations here, these symbols and names like ambition, conquest, or malice that may sometimes be used for certain synergies, combos you may want to set up. And they also have a score value. Now, as I said, a lot of the cards are going to have to do with manipulating the board, but they do other things as well. A lot of the standard deck building stuff, some might allow you to draw more cards. Some might allow you to thin your deck. There's a unique way to thin your deck in this game, which is promoting. Some cards will allow you to promote other cards. And when that happens, you remove them from your deck and put them aside into what is called your inner circle. And you'll notice there are actually 2 point values at the bottom of each of these cards. One of them is how much they're worth at the end of the game if you have them still in your deck. One is how much they're worth if they went to your inner circle. So you might be deciding when you want to trade them in for more points at the trade-off of not having them anymore to actually play. There's also a few standard cards that are going to be out, the House Guards and the Priestess of Lolth, which give you power or influence respectively. And there is one deck that uses these insane outcasts, which you give to other players and actually makes them lose points. You're trying to clog their deck up with those. Each game you're going to have two different factions, so to speak, and you're going to decide which ones you want. So like the base game they have set up is Drow and Dragons. So you can decide how you want to mix and match those for different play styles.
In order to claim victory in this game, though, you're going to need a lot of victory points. And while the inner circle in your deck will provide a good chunk of that, a majority will come from the board here. The board is broken up in 3 different sections. Depending on player count, you may use just the middle or 1 or 2 of the sides. Most of this is going to be dealing with your troops. Those are these little POG tokens. And more often than not, you're either going to be placing them in an area next to or adjacent to where you already have people. Each circle can hold 1 troop, and if an area is full, you can't put anything else in there. You are trying to fight for control. If you have the most pieces there, you have the most control. If you're tied, be it with another player or the neutral pieces that start on the board, you do not have control of those sectors. There's also these big circle areas. They are more important, for if you have control there, you get this POG. If you have just control, not filled up completely, you have this one side which gives you 1 influence or ability to buy more cards each turn. But if, for example, here you have it completely, you have total control. And in this case, it's going to give you victory points every turn, meaning that other players aren't going to be happy and going to try to make sure you can't do that. There are a special kind of troop called spies. Placed there, for example, up here, can make sure someone doesn't have total control. There are also cards that let you either place more spies or even remove spies for bigger effects. And unlike the troops, which usually need to be placed near other troops, spies could go anywhere, so that's a good way for you to sort of spread your influence across the board. At the end of the game, you're going to look at victory points. If you have the most control in an area, you get those points. And if you control it completely, you're going to get an additional 2 points. There's going to be a little score pad where you're going to have points from all the different places that you can get it, and whoever has the most is truly the tyrant of the Underdark.
I guess so. I guess they truly are. We're all tyrants in the end, I like to think. So in terms of the mechanics, the deck building part of this game, if you're familiar with deck building games, you're pretty much right at home. It's the standard. I have the cards in my hand. I play them, see what currency I have in my pool for that turn, spend it split and so on. The territory control is where this game feels very different from most other deck building games. Now, as we said, this is the second edition, and before we get into it, I'll say this was our first time playing any version of Tyrants of the Underdark. So for us, this was all new, although we did take a peek at some of the changes. Maybe we can talk about that. But in terms of the rules, if you have played the original one, there is no change to the actual rules. All that's the same.
Right. As far as we can tell, the really, in terms of any kind of rule change, would just be including the aberrations and undead, which were an expansion, are now part of the base. So you just get everything in one box.
Right. But other than that, it's all the same. And yeah, I think the having this board in addition to the deck building definitely makes this game, like I said, feel very different. I mean, most of the cards are strictly about manipulating this board. In fact, I think like one of the mistakes that I made and continue to make while playing this game is it's very easy to fall into a pattern of just thinking about the deck building and going, okay, this, I need to get the higher power cards. They're worth more. Maybe I can, like you said, trade them in for promoting or whatever. But the board itself really, I think, is the focus, is the centerpiece of this game. And you need to definitely be mindful of where everyone's pieces are going if you want to win.
These major sites are definitely places you want to be important. Like the other ones will be sneaking up and that's where you get points. But having just that extra constant buying power, if you're lucky enough, victory points can really make the difference. Because sometimes when you get that hand, you're like, oh, I only have that one influence card, like to get one more. Oh, because I have this, I now have two. Or if somehow you control two, well, now I can actually buy maybe that red dragon because I was only able to make 6 on my own.
Yeah, they can be very, very, very important. And what's nice is I do think these spy tokens are a really cool way of hindering that. Even if you are on the other side of the board, you can send a spy anywhere you want. So it's not that hard to at least get in there and try to stop someone from getting those points, especially if you have more players. There's more opportunities for people to slow them down.
Well, what's also nice is you start on where these black squares are, depending on number of player counts. But a spy is a great way to be like, all right, I'm going to run over here. I can now place a troop there.
Right.
Because the spy allows you to at least where it's there. So that's a good way. You don't have to feel like you get locked out. And like if they're going over there, it's like, oh, it'd take me forever to reach across the board. No, you can get there. That said, every spy is deployed by a card. So if there's no cards coming up, or by the time it's your turn, all the spy cards are picked up, that's going to be a bit of an issue.
Right. Yeah. You are trying to get those. You need, that's can be a valid way to play for sure. But, what you don't need a card for is the stuff where you can affect the troops more directly, like assassinating them is the big one. If you have 3 power, you can just kill a troop off, and you get a point each time you kill one of those troops. So it helps you. And if it's someone else's piece, obviously you're hurting them as well. So if you can go for that power, that's obviously has a lot of different uses, and also in placing the troops and spreading out. I feel like that's kind of the, you kind of want to strike a balance of spreading out to cover a large territory, or killing off other people so you have more of a control and keep them from getting too much control over any one area, which can be a hard balance to strike depending on your position in the game. And it's also interesting because, as you said, there's the viability of these sites during the game and how important it is to control them and get points during the rounds. But then also at the end of the game, while these sites, they don't give you a bonus every turn, if you have a bunch of them at the end, you could be getting a lot of extra points that way. So there's a lot of interesting games you can play with the area control stuff, I think.
And the decks themselves, it's interesting because, usually when you play deck builders, it's like everything in this group has something that, like, if you play off another green card beforehand, it does something. This is like the demons are the ones that use the insane outcasts. The elements are going to be the ones that want you to play off of this guile and conquest and stuff. And with 6 groups, if I'm counting them correctly in my head,
you are.
That means there's enough weird, depending on which ones you pick, could either be like you're going to have a lot more ramping, or you can have a much more aggressive game where cards are a lot more hitting the other opponents, making them discard or gain those outcasts. So you can sort of, I feel like there's a lot more customizing since you're only choosing 2 groups versus when maybe you choose like 5 in other deck building games to really dictate the pace of the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not fully in love with the system. I don't mind it in theory, but I wish there was more. Like you said, there's one group that really focuses on the synergy of getting multiple cards of the same type.
Right.
And I feel like in most deck building games, that's just a given across every group. Like our first game, we played with the basic ones, and it was a little weird that I just didn't care about those. So maybe the solution is just always include that group. I don't know. It depends on how you feel about it, but I do kind of wish there was a little more overlap between them. I don't know how I feel about their specific
I think
powers.
The problem is in that case, for example, we see that more as like, yeah, that's just something most deck builders do because it's fun. That's the synergy of your deck. And
Well, otherwise, it just takes away so much strategy from what you're buying. You're
Yes.
just always buying the highest card,
like
not thinking about it.
some of the other ones made sense being
More specific to that
more
group.
specific in
Yeah.
that group. We do feel like that one, because that's a whole picture and line on the card that's now not being used.
Right.
When we did have it was a lot of fun, and also being able to. I do feel like there's a lot of cards that have choice, which I enjoy. That's like choose: do you want the buying power or do you want to do this? Especially almost every spy card's that. Which one of the reasons why I like the spies. Not only do they help with the board, they're gonna make your turns a bit more interesting. Now, I do want to comment though on the first edition from what we can see. We haven't seen it in person, so we can't tell about like comparing some component quality, in particular the cards. But that one has miniatures for all these pieces, including the spies. And on that front, I actually sort of like this a little better. By the way, it is out of print, so like we did try to look up the MSRP price, and we think it was pricier than this from what we can tell.
This is a cheaper edition of the game.
Cheaper
for
edition,
sure,
but
in many ways,
it's also out of so this is what you get.
Yeah.
I do like this because one, the box is smaller, so it can fit more things. And this way also, I'm like, it still gets the point across. I think these are fine. Cards, on the other hand, I don't know what the other ones were like because I didn't hold them personally. I could read some descriptions, but you're going to want these sleeved.
Yeah, there are some issues with, well, for one thing, they're just not the best card stock. I think they will get worn quickly from all the shuffling. And there are some cards you can, if you look at the borders, tell which are the starter cards and which are new cards you're buying, which is obviously not good in a deck building game. I also will go further and say I don't like this.
Okay.
I wish I did have minis. These, again, just feel super cheap to me. And I mean, they're fine. They're functional. I can still like see everything on the board. But I just think having those minis stand up just it makes such a nice difference in being able to look and tell how everything is looking. I think I like that a lot. Like,
to me, this was not maybe I don't know if this is the same cards, like or trade up. Like this is something you should invest in, nice cards, especially a deck builder where you're always shuffling. But this, like I can see the state of the board. It's very clear to me. I mean, these aren't ripping compared to some other cardboard pieces in some other games. And when you kill something, you get a victory point for it, so you can just flip it over.
True, but also like they're always worth 1 point. So
yeah,
you don't
I know.
really need that reminder. You just count them.
I guess to me, this was a good trade-off also for like a smaller box and price.
But I think you could fit them in the square box. I suspect you could if you designed it better. But yeah, like it's nice that it's going to be cheaper. I think that's the best part of it. But I do honestly hope that they maybe sell those minis separately because I think that the look of them personally was a lot. Like I think of a game like War of Whispers that we played before that I think there was a special edition and a standard edition. And I remember the mini versions of it I liked so, just made it pop so much more. I think in general, I'm actually one of my bigger disappointments of this game is just kind of the aesthetics and the design of it. For what's a cool world, you have the Dungeons & Dragons mythos and universe going on here. The board is really bland. These spaces are functional, but nothing else. The names don't matter. They could not be there and you wouldn't notice. Even the art and the cards is fine. Most of it's from D&D books and stuff, but it's nothing. I'm not feeling like, oh, I'm playing a kobold. Like none of that. There's no thematic relevance to it. I don't like the backs of these cards. I think they're really ugly. So in general, in terms of the components and stuff, I didn't really like it. That said, it didn't have a hugely negative impact while I was playing the game. It's just my preference. I would like more of a like fancy, nice version of this, but to me, it feels like they went cheaper, not to help the consumer, but more to help themselves. That's the impression I get.
I guess in some of those elements I could see that, but like I think like I don't think you could fit the minis in a square box. I looked at that. I
Okay.
think that the box I had before was
You
tight.
could make smaller versions
And
of the minis, maybe though, or some compromise is all I'm saying. Yeah.
and I do think that the playing the game for me at least was mostly of enough of being able to just like, oh, I'm thinking of the board and state and stuff. And it wasn't just like most deck building games when I'm just like, I'll buy the most expensive thing throughout the entire game. I
Mhm.
actually was thinking like, I really need more buying or this power or something like that.
Yeah.
And the placement of that. That said, though, I do like I even I cannot ignore the card stock and quality, and I do like this a lot.
Even you famously
No,
ignores all
no, like
flaws.
I was saying, like
Yeah, I know.
with everything I said there, I really do think if you are gonna play this a lot, which I would because I like it, I think it was fun.
You
You got to
sleeve
invest
it.
in that.
You have to sleeve it. I don't
Mhm.
even think it's an option. I think if you're going to play this with any degree of seriousness, and if you're not just, if you just don't care and you're like, whatever, my group is very casual, but if you care, you gotta get sleeves. I think it's a must.
Crits and misses for Tyrants of the Underdark.
Crits. In addition to the deck building aspects, this is an area control game. Adds another layer to it, has you focusing in more than one area and using multiple different options to gain your points.
This combination helps it stand out from your general deck builder, and with all the different ways you earn points as well, it means it's going to be much harder to tell who's in the lead by the end of the game.
With the different factions included in the game, you can tailor your game to exactly which types of abilities you enjoy, and each time you mix them up, you're going to get a slightly different experience.
Because the market deck only used two major factions, that means only two major mechanics are being used. That means regardless of what deck archetype you go for, you're probably going to see cards for it.
There's more than one way to thin your deck here, which is important in any deck building game, and the promotion mechanic is especially unique in that it allows you to trade cards out for more points at the end.
You can devour cards, which is your basic removing from deck, as we've seen in other games. But with that promotion to the inner circle, you're going to have to make the decisions of do I remove a weaker card or maybe a stronger card that gives more points? Misses. We pointed out that with the area control board that this stands out from other deck building games, but with that lineup and random market deck, it still has a bunch of the foibles that other deck building games have. In particular, depending on the lineup and what's available on your turn, other players might be able to get an unfair advantage on the board that will be hard for you to catch up. We did feel there were a couple mechanics that were sidelined to just one faction should have been a more universal mechanic, making it so there were better synergies regardless of which groups you were using.
It is nice that if there's a particular mechanic you don't enjoy, you can remove it and not have to have that involved in your game. But it made it sometimes feel like when you did have those in the mix, they were maybe too prevalent, or if they didn't come out, it didn't work as well with the combination you had in the other half of the deck. I would have personally just liked to see more spread around in terms of the different abilities between each group.
This is a new edition with new components. That said, looking at not only the components they included here as well as the art, you may feel a little disappointed. You may wish you've had those minis from the first one. And when it comes to those cards, you're definitely going to need to sleeve them if you want to play this game more than once.
The overall look and feel of the components feels pretty cheap to me. I wish there was another level of polish on it. I'm just not a huge fan of the aesthetic in general. I think we're pretty much on the same wavelength for the game itself,
Mhm.
but I definitely just the look of it. Like I said, just the board to me, it all looks very like first draft. I just feel like they could have done something, especially for a second edition. I feel like they had an opportunity to make it look prettier, and they just didn't do anything. And like I don't think if this choice was, you know what, the minis were too distracting, or it made the board too cumbersome, or maybe the game wasn't as accessible. But I really think they just said, you know what's the cheapest, fastest way we can make this game is these little tokens. And they're fine. They're not terrible. They're fine. But seeing the pictures of the original one, I did go, oh, that looks nicer to me. But I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, I gotta say, when I looked at the original one, because I also saw the size of the board, like not the board, the box.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, that looks
Well,
expensive.
no, I love the box being the square size. I think
Mhm.
that's for me maybe the only real improvement over this edition over the first, besides just that it's cheaper. I like if you have the original edition, there is no
Yeah,
reason to
no,
upgrade. It's not an
like
upgrade. It's a
the only thing I know of was including the expansion, which I obviously you probably just want to try to find that. I don't know how accessible either
right,
anything with the first
right.
edition is. I do wonder how much this version was chained because of that. For example, I think we mentioned the miss about spreading the mechanics. The big one being the elements. We love in card games when we can be like, oh, I played an ambition. Now because I played ambition, I can do this and this. And that's strictly in their wheelhouse. And
Mhm.
that easily could have been spread across all the groups. There are some that were more than happy that are in one, like using the insane outcast with the demons. We're like, you could have that.
But honestly, I kind of disagree.
Oh,
Like
sorry, I just used that. Like, I
no,
know
the
for
Insane
me.
Outcasts annoyed me because they were tied to one deck so heavily. But I think if they were just spread out here and there, it wouldn't annoy me quite as much because I would feel like they were a more integral part of the game as opposed to like this game, you're going to be seeing 100 of these, so just get ready for it. So I don't know, but a lot of people, and in terms of just the pure gameplay, I liked it. I think the game is good. I think a lot of other people are much bigger fans of it than maybe I am, obviously, but I did still have a good time with it. I think it's a very solid deck building game. I like the territory control aspect. So like, if you have any experience with this and you've liked it before, you'll still like it. It's that game.
Yeah, I did really enjoy this a lot because I generally enjoy deck builders, but adding this made me at least feel like my purchases in the sense of how does this affect the board, not just I mean, like there's times when I'm like, oh, I'll just buy that because that's 2 points, you
Mhm.
know. And of course, the inner circle thing was a fun, interesting twist as well.
Yeah, I like that.
But I do need to see that definitely. I do wish there was some mechanics spread out a bit more. And like we said, it doesn't make the anything you don't like about a deck building game. This won't fully make it disappear. There's a lot more player interaction with this,
Mhm.
and that there's carrying. But there were like times, for example, when I got all these spy cards before Jonathan, so all of a sudden I'm everywhere on the board, and there wasn't much he could do about that.
Yeah, so it's just it's just what
Yeah.
happens sometimes in deck building games, the way the lineup shakes out. But let us know what your experiences are with Tyrants of the Underdark. If you're someone who had that first edition, are you into the tokens? Do you miss the minis? Where do you stand on that versus any of other thoughts today? Give us your take in the comment section down below. We'd love to hear what you think about the game.
And what factions of minions do you think it makes the best game?
Mm.
Do you go with the standard Drow Dragon, or do you like to mix it up with one of the other ones?
Yeah, let us know down there. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I'm Jonathan,
I'm Will.
and this has been Roll for Crit.
Hey there, thank you so much for watching our video. Please, if you can, hit that like and subscribe. It really helps out a lot. And check out our Patreon. There we have a lot of cool stuff, including a Discord and a second part to our podcast. If you just want to hear the free one, don't worry. You can check out our board game podcast, which releases weekly, in the links down below.